I first noticed them in Chicago, half windows jutting from sidewalks, glass panes at ankle level looking down into rooms that shouldn't exist, basement apartments, they told me, old coal chutes, utility access for a city built in layers, reasonable explanations, comfortable explanations. But then I saw them in Seattle, in Boston, in Philadelphia, in San Francisco and Denver. Always the same design, always the same depth, always with the same architectural flourishes, arch tops, decorative ironwork, masonry that matched the buildings above them, not the crude additions you'd expect from later excavation. And that's when the comfortable explanations started to feel less like answers and more like rehearsed scripts. The deeper I looked, the more the pattern revealed itself. These weren't basements. They were ground floors, first floors, main entrances buried under feet, sometimes meters, of earth and asphalt and the accumulated sediment of a history we're not supposed to question. Here's what I found. In Edinburgh, the famous underground city isn't underground at all. It's the original street level, buried when they built the South Bridge in the 1780s. Walk through Mary King's Close and you're walking through doorways past windows into rooms that once saw daylight. The tour guides call it raising the street level. They say it casually, as if cities routinely bury themselves. In Rome, the Basilica di San Clemente sits atop two earlier churches, each built directly on top of the last. Descend through the layers and you find frescoes, altars completely intact, architectural spaces, all buried. The official explanation? Construction techniques of the time. But you're looking at deliberate burial, not construction. Room after room sealed and filled. In Savannah, Georgia, the entire historic district sits on top of itself. Factors Walk, the old merchant quarter, descends multiple stories below the modern street. Not gradual accumulation. Clean burial. Windows looking out from what is now underground, still framed, still glassed, still architecturally complete. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pattern extends across continents. In Istanbul, the Basilica cistern sits beneath the city, its columns and arches suggesting a structure far grander than mere water storage. In London, whole neighbourhoods exist below street level. In St. Petersburg, ground floors have become basements. In Paris, in Prague, in Budapest and Vienna and Madrid, all old cities, all the same depth, all with the same impossible precision. If you're finding this hard to believe, you're not alone. But before you click away, consider hitting that subscribe button, because what comes next only gets stranger. Here's where the official explanation collapses. They tell us these buried levels accumulated gradually. Centuries of debris, construction or organic matter slowly raising street levels. Natural urban evolution, they say. Happens everywhere, but it doesn't happen everywhere. Walk through a medieval village in England that never industrialised, never modernised, and you'll find the original ground floor still at ground level. No burial, no accumulation. These places are just as old, sometimes older, but they didn't sink. So why did major cities across different continents, different climates, different geological conditions all bury themselves to the same depth, in the same time frame, using the same architectural language? The depth itself is suspicious, not inches, not gradual settling. We're talking about 10, 12, sometimes 15 feet of coverage, enough to bury entire floors, enough to turn ornate main entrances into basement windows. And it happened quickly, not over centuries, but within decades. The evidence suggests something much larger. This is where I have to introduce a term that will make some of you uncomfortable. Mudflood. Not a flood of water, not gradual sedimentation, but a rapid, catastrophic deposition of mud and sediment that swept across multiple continents in the 1800s, burying the ground floors of existing cities and forcing populations to rebuild on top of the destruction. Tartaria researchers, and yes, I'm going there, point to this event as the Great Erasure. A reset, a moment when the old world was literally buried and a new narrative was written on top of it. And before you dismiss this as fringe conspiracy theory, ask yourself, why do we have so little documentation of this supposed gradual accumulation? Why are there no transition periods in photographs? Why does every old city photograph from the mid-1800s onwards show streets already at their elevated level, with no evidence of the raising process? This raises a simple but critical question. Where are the images of cities mid-burial? I've searched archives, city records, historical societies, university collections. What I found, or rather what I didn't find, was unsettling. Photographs of European and American cities begin appearing in significant numbers around the 1850s to 1870s. By then, the buried windows are already there, the streets are already elevated, the underground levels are already underground. But we have almost no photographic evidence of the transition, no images of workers filling in ground floors, no documentation of massive earth-moving projects that would have been necessary to bury entire city blocks, no contemporary accounts describing the logistics of such an undertaking. The silence was deafening. And here's the strangest part. The cities that were supposedly raising their streets were also experiencing unprecedented growth, industrialization, and architectural documentation. Engineers were photographing bridges, railways, new construction projects. Artists were capturing street scenes, markets, daily life. But nobody photographed the burial of entire neighborhoods. Nobody thought to document what would have been one of the largest public works projects in urban history. Now we arrive at the empire that isn't supposed to exist. Tartaria appears on maps well into the 1800s, not as a myth, not as a legend, but as a vast territory spanning much of northern Asia. Some maps label it explicitly Tartary, Grand Tartary, Independent Tartary. Others subdivide it Chinese Tartary, Muscovite Tartary. Then suddenly it disappears, not conquered, not absorbed, simply removed from maps, from history books, from collective memory. The standard explanation is cartographic confusion, outdated naming conventions, the gradual clarification of Central Asian geography as Western knowledge improved. But what if these cities, with their buried windows, their impossible architecture, their uniform design language, were part of something larger? What if they were nodes in a network we've been taught to forget? Before I go further, I want to hear from you. Have you noticed these underground windows in your city? Drop a comment below. Tell me what you've seen. Because this pattern is bigger than any one researcher can document alone. Let me describe what I'm seeing in these buried levels. Ornate cornices, granite lintels, precisely cut keystones, decorative brackets and ironwork. Not utility construction, not rough basement work, but finished architecture meant to be seen, admired, experienced at street level. In Montreal, the underground city reveals walls with detailed masonry, arched ceilings, craftsmanship that rivals the structures above it. In Seattle, Pioneer Square's underground tour takes you through storefronts, complete with their original display windows, all buried when the city regraded in the 1890s. These weren't designed to be underground, and they weren't built underground and then buried later. The construction sequence doesn't support it. The buildings above share foundations with the structures below. They're continuous, integrated, which means the lower levels were finished, occupied, lived in, and then deliberately filled in. Why? Not water damage, not slow erosion, not decades of gradual build-up, but meters of mud deposited rapidly enough that cities simply built over it rather than excavating. That's what the physical evidence suggests. Here's what keeps me awake at night. How did cities across different continents, governed by different powers, speaking different languages, make the same decision at roughly the same time? Edinburgh raises its streets in the late 1700s. American cities do the same in the mid to late 1800s. European cities follow similar patterns, all using similar techniques, all burying similar architectural styles, all to similar depths. This wasn't gradual. This wasn't independent development. The official histories treat each city as an isolated case. Local decisions, local conditions, local solutions, but when you map them globally, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Were they responding to the same event, following instructions they didn't fully understand, covering evidence of something they were told to erase? I've read city council minutes, engineering reports, contemporary newspaper accounts of street-raising projects. What strikes me isn't what they say, it's what they don't say. No mention of where the fill material came from. No discussions of the unprecedented logistics. No public outcry about burying entire businesses, entire lives. No debates about alternative solutions. Just acceptance. As if the decision had already been made elsewhere by someone else and local authorities were simply executing a predetermined plan. In Seattle's case, the Great Fire of 1889 provided convenient cover. We're rebuilding anyway, might as well raise the streets. But the fire didn't explain why the new street level was built precisely where it was. Why that particular height? Why fill in the old level rather than simply building anew? The same pattern appears in other cities that experience convenient disasters right before major regrading projects. Fire, flood, earthquake, each providing justification for burial and rebuild, convenient timing, disturbingly convenient. And then there's the question nobody wants to ask. How did they build these structures in the first place? The buried levels show construction techniques that seem almost too advanced for their supposed era. Precision masonry, perfect arches, stone cutting and placement that modern contractors admit they'd struggle to replicate without computer-aided design. Look at the granite work in these underground spaces. Single pieces, 10 tons or more, cut and fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away. Lifted and placed without modern cranes or hydraulics. The official story says they used ramps, pulleys, and human labour. But where are the failed attempts? The learning curve? The progression from crude to refined? Instead, we find fully realised architectural mastery appearing suddenly in the historical record, as if the knowledge arrived complete and ready to deploy. This raises a simple but critical question. Were they building according to inherited knowledge? Following templates from a civilization that came before? What haunts me most is the speed of forgetting. These weren't ruins discovered by archaeologists centuries later. These were functioning cities, occupied spaces, familiar landscapes, buried within living memory, and yet, within a generation or two, they became mysteries. Underground tours, historical curiosities, the original purpose forgotten, the original inhabitants erased, the original significance lost. How does an entire civilization forget its own ground floor? Not slowly, not gradually, but abruptly, as if a collective decision was made to stop talking about what came before, to accept the new narrative, to bury the questions along with the architecture. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm asking you to look. Walk through your city's old quarter. Find the windows at ankle level. The doorways that open to dirt. The architectural flourishes, meant to be seen from the street now buried below it. Ask yourself, why? Not why they're beautiful. Not why they were built. But why they were buried. Why the burial was so uniform. Why it happened so quickly. Why it's been so thoroughly normalized. The deeper I went, the less the official explanation satisfied. Gradual accumulation doesn't explain precision. Urban renewal doesn't explain global coordination. Local decisions don't explain identical patterns across continents. What if these underground windows aren't evidence of cities slowly sinking, but of a world deliberately covered? What if the mudflood, whether natural disaster or something else, forced a reset. And what if the civilization that built these structures, this Tartaria that appears and disappears from maps, was erased not just from the landscape but from memory? I don't know what Tartaria was. I don't know if it was an empire, a network, a shared cultural inheritance, or something else entirely. But I know that cities don't bury themselves without reason. I know that architectural knowledge doesn't appear fully formed without precedent. I know that global patterns suggest global events, not local anomalies. And I know that the silence surrounding these questions is itself suspicious. Who benefits from forgetting? Who decided what history to preserve and what to bury? And why are we so quick to accept explanations that don't actually explain? The underground windows are still there. The buried architecture remains. The evidence hasn't gone anywhere. It's just been covered up, like everything else. What do you think happened? Was this natural accumulation, deliberate burial, or evidence of something we've been taught to ignore? The comment section is yours. The mystery remains. The windows remain. The questions remain. And beneath our feet, an entire world waits to be remembered.